My name is Serge Stingbish. I'm the head of research at the United Nations University Institute in Macau. So the United Nations University is a global think tank, and we are headquartered in Japan. We are composed of 13 research institutes located in 12 different countries around the world. And we are engaged in policy-oriented research, capacity development, and also dissemination of knowledge. And we are strongly aligned with the purposes and the principle of the Charter of the United Nations. So our mission is to contribute to research, to efforts to resolve the pressing global challenges of nowadays. And this new series, this UNU Generative AI series, is a series of webinars where we see that we are in a new area with the rapid advancement and transformative potentials of AI systems. And we want to cultivate a comprehensive understanding in order to foster a more informed and responsible use of these emerging technologies. So UNU Macau is leading this program, and we are inviting researchers from the UNU system, but also people in our network of academics, people, policy world, and private sector also. And we ask them to deliver presentation on topics related to generative AI. So we like to present this topic from diverse perspective. So not only the technical perspective, but also the impact on health, education, environment, climate, etc., etc. So today we have the Professor Fernando Buarque, who is the guest speakers of this second session. So I want to briefly introduce him before we start the presentation. So Professor Fernando Buarque has a PhD in artificial intelligence from the Imperial College London in 2002. He is an associate professor and is the head of AI lab at the University of Pernambuco in Brazil. He has supervised over 120 students and authored over 240 scientific publications and 6 books. His current research is tackling complex decision problems via rational, explainable, evolutionary, and social processes. And he thinks that responsible AI can lead to flourishing societies. So the title of the presentation of today is Why Generative Methods Are Still Missing Something to Become Responsible AI. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you, Professor Buarque. Bom dia. I know this is a little bit early for you in Brazil. So the floor is yours now. You have 30, 40 minutes for your presentation, and then we will move to the Q&A session with the audience. So thank you very much for coming and joining this session.
Fantastic, Serge. Bonjour. Bon dia, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here. And I'm really honored to be part of this discussion because, as I wrote here, generative AI is a revolution. I think it's a revolution within the revolution. Therefore, we have to discuss this extensively. So, Serge, with your permission, I will share my screen now. So let's see if this works. Can you see my screen? Okay. So as I discussed with Serge, my presentation here is a collection of thoughts and current position. And I appreciate that the UNU team has created this series because sometimes in a conference you feel a bit restrained to discuss topics widely. So please take this as a position presentation. So the topics here are not written in stone. But I would like to tell you that this presentation has actually 2 titles. The one that is in bold here, and another one I will explain in a minute, which seems to be fancy, but which is Navigating the Frontier, Responsible AI in the Age of Generative Innovation. Well, Serge mentioned some of my previous deeds, universities, but I would like to acknowledge some of my research teams. Some of my students and colleagues are here, so it means that they are early. They have to wake up early, and also my funding agencies, and two publications that I cherish a lot. Two books on AI, one for economists and the other one for children. For you that do not know where Recife is, we are by the sea. We are one of the shortest points to Europe and to Africa, and perhaps you can see that Brazil in very old times was connected with Africa. Recife is a large city. Some pictures of Recife for you to see. And those are some key facts about our research group. Next year, we are going to turn 20 years. As I told you, this talk carries many philosophical reflections, ongoing results, and many other points open to discussion. And I prepare that as a sequel to the first one delivered by Serge Stinkovic a few weeks ago. And I hope this somehow continues the discussion, because Serge talked about sustainability, and my take today is about responsibility. I would like to say that we are experiencing a new revolution centered on AI, as everybody obviously know. But my take here is to discuss the tools themselves, because they are not only ubiquitous, but they are amazing, sometimes crazy. So the tools we have are completely different from any other ones we had. So, for example, as I'm going to discuss GPT, I thought of asking GPT to prepare at least the cover slide of this presentation. And to be honest with you, I think it did a brilliant job. I asked GPT to prepare something that puts together Recife and Macau, and it came up with this beautiful painting. And not only that, but it somehow created this title, and also made a kind of magic, transforming myself into this Hollywood-like action character. To be honest with you, I like that very much. Okay, but as it should be, this is just an icebreaker, but I have another one. Because when we talk about GPT, sometimes we don't have the grips with the profound change it is creating in our society. One point that might illustrate that is this patent from Microsoft. I don't know if you know, but now you can wear GPT. So yes, you have not heard wrongly. Microsoft filed a patent for you to include GPT in a backpack. They have even a rendering of that. So it is really something that is mind-boggling. Well, as for the outline of this presentation, I divided this into some parts. So I plan to give you a very brief context, then talk about two major problems that we encounter with GPT itself. Then I will discuss the factibility, in my opinion, of course, and some concerns, because those concerns perhaps could fuel some discussions towards the end. And of course, a conclusion. But let's start with the liar paradox. I like the liar paradox because it tells something about us as humans. Because as you know, believing is easier. And this paradox can be a starting point for our discussion here. Okay, let's start with the context, the age of AI. As I told you, I think humans have are tool makers, and we have been tool makers for a long time. And the fact that we are increasing the complexity and the level of features that the tools can produce, it's striking on itself. The problem is that currently the tools we have are impacting the very fabric of our society. So it's changing everything, okay? And as I said, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And the applications range from service to fun, information, and decision support. In this presentation, I will very much focus on information and decision support, which to me are fair use of AI in general, and areas in which we have to be very careful because it's an uncharted territory. Tools to help humans to take decisions are not new, but tools that are able to take decisions on themselves, and obviously with an impact on our lives, this is something new. Good. So what is then the difference? So as I commented before, so we have been tool makers for thousands of years, but the tools up to now had only one purpose, or perhaps a few purposes, but not with the computers. The tools are now able to be adapted to the problems, and until I would say the beginning of the 21st century, the tools did not pose a threat to us. But now with a more advanced AI, this has changed dramatically, because not only the tools can adapt fast, but they can take the decision at their own hands, if I can say that. And obviously, the tools can be used for evil, okay? And this can lead, for example, to be used for deceiving the natural mechanism of believing, namely fake news, misinformation, etc., which is really a plague, as I'm going to discuss a little bit later. And when we talk about decisions, they have changed as well, because now we have many apparently good choices in front of us, and it's a paradox, because the tools can be dangerous, but we cannot live without them anymore, because for us to take decisions in this complex world we lived in right now, we cannot afford losing the power of AI and generative techniques, for example. So what is the difficulty then? The difficulty here is that distinguishing what is true or not, what is good or evil, tasty and not, worthy and not, useful and not, this is not an easy task anymore. And we all know that some companies can use AI for the benefit, and some of them even can use methods that are not necessarily very correct. So on that tone, let me talk a little bit about my views on the history of AI. Let's divide this into two parts. I mean, the ones that count, because AI has more than 80 years of age right now. But let's talk about the last 40 years. I say very often that the 2 decades at the end of the 20th century represented an era in which we had 3 generations, in my opinion, of very simple rule-based systems. Then we evolved to expert systems. Then we could plug them into decision support systems. And later on, we had more widespread use of artificial neural networks. But so far, until I would say the beginning of the 21st century, AI was not a trend, was not dangerous, but all that changed in this century. And I think that when deep neural networks and all these deep technologies associated with swarm intelligence, more advanced evolutionary computation. So when you put all that together, the whole thing changed. Tools become quite useful for industry, for real use, but still not so dangerous. But recently, we have tools that can, of course, be a threat to humankind. I very often say that the 5th generation is the need for tools that can explain themselves, okay? And this is obviously not ubiquitous yet, but it will be necessary if we would like to live in a world that is safe. And not only that, we have to have tools that are responsible, you see, because in the past, if you produce a tool that could solve a complex problem, the end user would be very happy with you. But now, the market, let's say, demands tools that not only solve problems, but explain how the problems are solved. And in the near future, I forecast that it would be mandatory. Currently, AI is almost unregulated everywhere, but it would be mandatory that tools are fair and ethical, and they have to cater for aspects to control themselves and possess mitigation methods. Recently, I thought that perhaps we have already a looming 7th generation that I called conscious AI. Well, that's the picture, the big picture. But let's talk about some of the risks very quickly, because you probably all know that. So number 1 would be a threat to the labor market. Initially, we had the blue-collar workers at threat, but now white-collar workers are absolutely feeling the heat. Lawyers, accountants, and perhaps in the future, people from the service industry, like waiters and even teachers, would be at risk. The World Economic Forum has a very nice report on that. It's a regular report. The second one would be education. Perhaps we are going to not only produce, as I was talking about in the labor market, people that cannot be employed, unemployables, but perhaps would be having, if education do not adapt, AI outcasts, which is quite sad, because it's completely avoidable if we adapt the educational system to the skills that are necessary. So risk number 3 is, in my opinion, the privacy loss. And this, perhaps it's almost there. So we are not alone in the streets, in the virtual world. So this is probably all gone now, or in a very advanced way to be gone. Another threat that I would like to pose is the loss of individuality. This has started, this is a picture of a classroom, an experimental classroom with students being monitored. And I personally think this is a complete invasion of the mental world. I would say the last frontier, the place we are alone, or we could be alone. So we have to think about that, to be honest with you. And of course, another risk is the loss of democracy, because we all know that AI could produce mechanisms to pose threats to elections, which are the very basic principle of healthy democracies. And this is kind of troublesome. And of course, the last one for this, obviously there are many more, is misinformation, fake news. And I would like to, in the coming slides, to go deep on that. But I found this neologism called infodemic, and I think this is quite interesting for us to discuss, because not only the possibility for a meme to traverse the internet is higher, but the long-term damage could be even comparable to the ones of pandemics such as COVID-19. Well, but in my opinion, there is something even worse than all this, which is, I would say, one of our major errors. And this is the delegation of human-bound decisions to machines. And I'll explain why. Because when a human, this is obviously the very famous trolley dilemma, when we have humans taking decisions that are life-threatening, etc., the consequences are sometimes very bad, but at least the humans have or possess reflection, emotions, and safety measures for their thoughts. And sometimes machines, I would say that machines now are not prepared for such decisions. And this is something that we have to address, because the electric cars, the autonomous cars, are perhaps almost taking these decisions every second when they are driving in our streets. For example, to your left, this car, if he uses logic, it might be selecting to kill the old lady. But my problem is not only that, these decisions with severe consequences, but I would comment as well on that a little later. But imagine that we are towards the end of the world, and then we need everybody that has some skills to be working, and then the car will kill the baby. You see, so it's non-deterministic, this kind of decision. But bear with me, the machines that are taking these decisions, they have lots of misses, and this is the object of this talk. So let's move on to what I think are two big problems. And those problems, to me, are not only big, but also big points for us not to use GPT so wildly as we are doing right now. I'll try to explain that and provide some arguments, and I'm dying to see your questions towards the end. Okay, so the first problem is the entropy problem. So you may have studied this in physics, etc., but entropy is something that you can translate to many sciences, including computer science. But let's talk a little bit about very simple thing. For example, if you add two numbers and this produces another one, nothing can be easier than that, okay? At the moment, so far, no problem whatsoever. But when you move on in your computations, in your decisions, it is very likely that you lose the link between cause and effect. For example, if you move on and you have now only 137 in your computer, perhaps you lose what produced 137. And in computer science, that could be entropy, you see. Obviously, you can also say that noise in communication is entropy, or could be equated to that as well. By the way, this number 137, actually 1 over 137, is just for you to do a little bit of research later on. It's considered one of the weirdest number in existence. Who said that was Wolfgang Pauli, because apparently this number 1 over 137 is one of these numbers that it's everywhere in nature. For example, this is the probability for an electron to absorb a photon, and also the fine structure of matter in terms of the levels of energy, etc. Anyway, but let's move on with the thought on entropy. If you take now, let's move from mathematics to electronics. If you have a gate like this, and you applied some input, you have an output. Everybody in hard science have probably studied that. Again, you observe here a very interesting principle, because you have the output, but you lose the input. In this case, in the form of heat. But that heat is, again, the entropy I'm referring to. If we come out from hardware to software, and we have a neural network here, and you applied an input and you get an output, again, you lose the connection between this cause and effect. Why I'm mentioning this? Because when you have, for example, a deep neural network that heavily empowers the generative technologies with many layers for features, in this case, for example, linking an image to a name, this on itself, it's something striking, because it's not a simple task, and computers are, with these technologies, excelling and even with results that could be better than humans. But the same applied here. So we lose somehow the possibility to backtrack, at least in an easy way. So if we move on to entropy from Shannon, I don't know if you are familiar with that, but Shannon is the father of information theory, and he has lots of very fundamental statements, but one of them is about a noisy channel. And if we have an error, for example, instead of Sarah, we have Lara, and we would like to correct that, it would be not so easy to do that, especially if you have a very deep architecture. For example, what I'm saying here is assuming that GPT prompts as noisy channels alone, they will likely not to be able to correct on their own biases. Don't know if you realize what I'm trying to talk here. This could be, for example, if this network recommends things like ties for people, it could become racist, as it happened with some of these famous platforms. I will not name names here. And this is something very troublesome, because we would like, at least I would like, to have a tool that is explainable. It explains itself, a tool that corrects its error. I'm talking about CHAI, explainable AI, and responsible AI. And I think this is a big problem to be addressed. As a matter of fact, this is linked to what the mathematicians talk as or refer to as the inverse problem. Because we are all used to the idea, Aristotelian idea, of deduction, meaning that from a model we can infer, sorry, somebody's with the microphone open. So we can infer data in a forward path. But with that, I don't know if you remember the basics here, but with deduction, there is no creation of knowledge. It's just to sort out what is already known. So if you have a good model, if you have an inspiration on how to solve a problem, that's fine. You can produce good results with computers, with AI, etc. But if you don't have a good model, you cannot predict data in a good way. I would say that modern AI profits a lot about another philosopher, this one, a more recent one, a Scottish one called David Hume, who introduced the idea or formalized the idea of induction. Because complementary to deduction, induction could perform the backward path, or could perform or help to solve the inverse problem. Meaning that if you have lots of data about a problem, about a system, you can infer the model, the generative model. Why I'm saying that? Because we mastered that already. So neural network, artificial neural networks are very good example of inductive methods that from lots of examples, with lots of examples, we can infer the generative model for those data. And then we can produce new data, which is even more striking. I credit to induction to many of the success of modern AI. Well, but let's talk a little bit more about the inverse problem, because as you all know from mathematics, you can have functions that are means to link an input to an output. And if you would like to inverse the problem, or meaning to calculate the causes of something, the function has to be invertible. And you have three examples here that are not invertible. By the way, the last one, in the bottom right, it's not even a function, and because it you never know the possibilities that have generated outputs in set B. But let's see it in another way, in a more mathematical one. When you talk about induction, you are in the present, and then you can understand what happened to you. If this is a manager in a company, you can tell to the directors the sales report from last month. That's okay, but on itself, it's not striking. But for example, when we have induction, we can forecast the sales. It's a completely a different ballgame. And we have been doing this for 30 years now. But when we put the two together, this is even more striking, because if we, for example, produce a future scenario and then position yourself into the future, you can tell to somebody who is in the present what he or she should be doing to achieve the goals or to avoid the risks. I would like to make very clear that here that I'm not contradicting myself. I'm saying that, for example, with abductive methods, abduction is a name selected by Charles Sanders Peirce. When we have abductive methods, we can, with a degree of flexibility, solve or help to solve the inverse problem. But the answer is not deterministic. The answer is not unique, you see? So if you, and this is my point with GPT, if you have GPT, you may have a possibility to control it or to understand what is going on there, but the answer will not be unique, okay? Let's move on. Now the second problem, and this is even more troublesome, because we are talking about veracity. I'll start with a spoiler. GPT cannot ascribe veracity to anything. It cannot tell what is true or false. And on itself, it's a huge limitation. I'm not saying that we should not use generative technologies, but we have to be very cautious. And in the last presentation, Serge mentioned some of the problems. Okay, GPT could get confused, can lie on purpose to achieve the goals, etc. But let's stick to the point I'm trying here. If you go to a dictionary, veracity means conformity to facts, accuracy, but it's more than that. When we talk about the ability to ascribe truth value to something, this is something that needs or require extra capacities that perhaps are a little bit beyond the current logic we are using now in our systems. Because let me give you one example. If you go to the 18th century or 19th century, the idea of truth would be that something that is pure, it hides nothing. This is a painting. Perhaps Serge has already seen that. La Vérité au Musée d'Orsay in Paris. So Lefebvre represented truth like this woman without any clothes, without any, and the meaning is it's transparent, it's clear, it hides nothing. Well, but my point here is this has to be perceived. You see, there are meaning, and I'll discuss a little later here, that we cannot talk about. We can only feel. They are evident, but we can. It's not straightforward. By the way, I'll show you something interesting a little later. So to me, my current reflection is that perhaps veracity so far can be achieved only if we measure things. What I'm saying is it's very difficult for us to have an absolute definition of veracity for something. We very well in computer science can measure distances between one reference point to another and say that something is closer or apart. This is fine. But the absolute truth, it's not necessarily so, at least to me, so easy to achieve. So the point I would like to make also is that it's funny to know, I don't know if you guys realize that, but a sister concept to veracity is liberty. And this is a very interesting coincidence. A friend of the painter Lefebvre was commissioned to a statue, and you know, obviously you know that. And what he did was to put some clauses on the truth, and it becomes liberty. To be honest with you, the first time I thought that, I saw this, I did not get. But now, with this discussion about limits of liberty of, for example, speech or freedom of speech, perhaps you have to put some clothes on the truth. This is just a side note. Anyway, let's carry on with the discussion here. Let's put this in the context of this flood of misinformation. If for you to ascribe the truth value of veracity is difficult, let alone if this is in the current plague of misinformation. My understanding is perhaps it's only feasible for us to have a relative measure. So I am not convinced that it is feasible to really have an absolute definition of. And if you go to the literature in humanities, sociologists and anthropologists, they discuss that, because perhaps it's all for the anthropologists. Everything is not absolute, is a perspective. For example, in this meme, we have one object which is real in this picture. But if you have two different sources of light, different colors, the perspective of vision would give you a particular true value to the observer, which is not wrong, but alone they are not the whole picture. And perhaps this is the reason why we have so many discussions and fights over the internet. The other point here is that perhaps if we add more dimensions to the perception of truth, we get a little closer to it. I'm not saying that we are going to achieve it. Now, very fast on factibility. I just advance here the point that I don't think we can make assessments to truth in the near future, or at least it would not be feasible to do that. And also, yes, we can make lots of progress to enhance the AI support for understanding, explaining, and interpretations of things. I will skip this very quickly because I would like to focus a little bit more on the end of towards the end. But I recommend for you, if you have the time, to go to this website. The School of Arts, the University of California, Los Angeles, when it completed 100 years, they held a series of talks about truth. And I find that very interesting. I picked 4 points for you, and quickly I will just mention. For example, Jason Sexton said that there are transcendentals that are not things that can be created or established by conventions. And this is interesting because truth, beauty, goodness are examples of that, meaning that perhaps we cannot create it or establish what is truth or not. Obviously, we cannot make something true by wishing it, although lots of people in the internet, they try. Another, so by the way, as I am working on this, I use this as an inspiration for certain applications of ours. But here, what I take from this is that the very existence of something perhaps can only be produced by consensus, definitely not by a single observer. Second point of the 4 I picked, this is another statement from Professor Sexton. Truth is not a matter of perspective. And this may contradict what I just said, but if you think more closely, they are not conflicting statements, because here the idea is that individual perspectives do not change the facts of the reality. They are aspects of it. I find this very interesting, and to me, that thought of calculating distances become even more, I would say, plausible, feasible. The third one, very interesting one, truth is something that both sees you and frees you. In terms of it has to be stable and discoverable. If you have something that changes, so perhaps the nature of change has severe implications on the truth's establishment. Again, another thing that I personally find very inspireful is that this sends us toolmakers to the production of classification tools, because this is a classification problem in a dynamic environment. And the last one I picked from another professor, truth and trust go hand in hand. And this is very interesting because at that point during the lectures, they made a very, I think, sound statement that the level of truth depends on how much you trust the source of that information. That even links to Shannon's idea on information theory. And to me, input curation is also a very good idea for if we would like to produce tools that are at least a little bit connected to responsible computation. And on the second part, meaning that how we can produce enhanced decision support systems, I divided this into 3 different operations: interpretation, explanation, which is very dear to me at the moment, and understanding. Obviously, understanding, it's more complicated, and I'm trying to avoid the Chomsky's apple discussion you may have heard about. Explanation is very nice, but I would like to focus here on the interpretation of facts. If you would like to see the discussions on the Chomsky's apple, there is a link here. I will not go into details on that. But let's talk about the pragmatics of what I've just said. What I'm trying to say is that if you focus on the interpretation, perhaps it's an objective thing, and then you can tell the what of the problem is. But if you go a little further, and if you would demand explanation, your method has to go on the how, on the way the processing happens. And for example, the platforms here in Brazil is a big debate because the government would like to exert a little bit of more control on the platforms. They don't want to tell how they recommend things because they claim this is intellectual property. But my question, and I think this is a fair one, is if you would like to regulate AI, because so far it's completely free, can do whatever the programmer produce, and you do not tell how, or at least you cannot extract the how part of it, it's very dangerous, I would say. And of course, the understanding, which is very complicated. So just one example for you to understand what I mean on the easiest one, which is the interpretation. For example, if you see one picture such as this, okay, perhaps you have mixed feelings if you do not know the history. If you see, for example, a picture of that, again, perhaps you think that is nice. People are celebrating the colors of their countries. But if you carry on and you see pictures like that, everybody, at least in a sensible way, would say this is a crime, or these are crimes. I'm not sure machines have this feeling. Perhaps they have, if they connected with other extra information, etc. But this is at least what they should be doing. Now, some of my concerns. I selected 5 concerns when we talk about GPT. Solipsism, sensing, limits of language, consciousness, and responsibility. I don't know if you are familiar with the idea of solipsism. I will try to go to the very first source of it, which is 2,500 years ago, Gorgias, pre-Socratic, etc. So he said, nothing exists. If something exists, nothing can be known about. Even if something could be known about, knowledge about it cannot be communicated to others. What does this has to do with GPT? Because if Gorgias, and there are many other thinkers that follow him, is right, not only I cannot tell what is inside of your mind, but I am not able to know what is in the mind of GPT. This is what he said. Formally, this is the impossibility of objective knowledge. I'm not saying this is right or this is even up to date, but I think this is a fair discussion. The concern number 2 is about sensing. And this is kind of very intriguing to me. Perhaps the most of you have seen the morning star, or depending on where you are during the day, you see the evening star. Very beautiful pictures. But then there is this gentleman called Gottlob Frege, who wrote a very seminal paper on understanding of language. The paper, most famous one to me, is Sense and Reference. I'll try to explain. It's a very complex theory, but let's try to make it simple. If I say morning star is the morning star, I cannot learn a lot. By the way, I cannot learn anything, although it's a reference. So you have a perfectly formed sentence here, but in terms of information, nothing is being informed. If I say morning star is beautiful, now I learned something about your opinion. But as I would like to tell you, if I say, not me saying, Pythagoras said that the morning star is the evening star, then I hope you have felt this wow factor inside of you. Not only I am being informed of something, but I'm feeling something because I felt the image of the morning star. I felt the image, I sensed the image of the evening star, and now I know that they are the same. They are not two different things. I learned that and I felt that. If I carry on and say that the morning star is not a star, that's something in the same level as a wow factor. And if I tell you that the morning star is a planet and it's Venus, again, another wow factor. So when we talk about learning things from language models, we have to bear in mind that informative stuff is most of times not empiric. We cannot feel it. This is powerful, at least to me, because, and then I question you, can generative techniques sense things or only be informed of things and perhaps combine that in an inductive, very complex inductive way? The concern number 3, it's about limits. And then I summon here Ludwig Wittgenstein, who is par with Frege in terms of trying to advance linguistics. By the way, I'm not an expert in linguistics. I'm just trying to put this here in context of tools that we are relying so much and have limitations to me. But from his most famous book, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, Wittgenstein said things, he was very powerful, very dense. What can be shown cannot be said. As a matter of fact, what he would like to say is that there are things we know, logical forms, internal structures, that are shown to us, known in the sense of we have been presented to, but we cannot say anything about. And he said also that the limits of my language means the limit of my world. So bear with me. The tools are not, the two statements are not conflicting. As a matter of fact, what I think he is trying to say is that our language does not inform all. It's a little bit of a confirmation of what I've just said about Frege. Again, trying to connect with generative techniques. So perhaps we will not be able to inform GPT about stuff, and it cannot inform well about what it has in its mind, if you allow me to say that. Because it's a debate, vivid debate, if GPT, if it has a mind. And obviously, it leads us to consciousness. And then I summoned somebody that it's very dear to me, perhaps to you as well, which is Alan Turing. In one of his most famous paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, 1950, so over 70 years of age, Turing, by the way, this guy has a very interesting way to write papers. In his paper, he was trying to advocate things, and then he, in the middle of the paper, he produced lots of arguments against his point to later deconstruct those. And this is one argument against the point of machines be able to think. But said that I would take this argument for as a concern to GPT. So basically, Turing said, or quoted Professor Jefferson's this oration, in which he said that he probably would think of a machine conceive a machine thinking only if it's if it would be able to write a sonnet, compose a concerto, etc. However, because GPT can do that, I mean, these generative techniques, but bear with me, out of thoughts and emotions. And this is what I don't think currently is in existence. Perhaps we can have people trying to, that may have different opinions. Because for that, you would need something greater than just the rationality or the logics or the thinking ability. You would have to have reflective abilities, emotional abilities, etc. I know that perhaps people disagree with that, but to me, it's a concern. And I would subsume that as thinking is not feeling. It's another stuff. The other concern is about responsibility, which is the central point here. And I would say that we cannot talk about responsibility in a very simplistic way. We have to talk about it in its social impacts, economical impacts. We cannot combine the two. We cannot see this only as a computational task. We have to analyze that in a legal framework, in a political framework, in an ethical framework. People tend to resume the responsibility only to ethics and morality, but there are other dimensions that should be catered for. And then I started thinking about many aspects within such dimensions. I don't have time to comment them all. I think that time is a little bit of the essence here. But to us, computer scientists, computer engineers, we have to endow or to consider all these dimensions when we build responsible systems. Otherwise, we are going to a very dangerous path, which is machines receiving delegations to which they are not ready. And I'm not saying that humans are masters of taking good decisions or so, but what I'm saying that at least we have, in a limited way, dots of all those worries. For example, if you are a reasonable person, you have at least, or you think about the consequences of your actions, which is something that we have to make mandatory. Yes, you heard it right. My opinion is that AI systems involved in crucial decisions, they have to have mitigation mechanisms to avoid bias. Anyway, I'll skip this through and go directly to the conclusions now. This is a definition for what responsible AI is. Last year I was in Portugal in a very nice lecture, and I come up with that. But when I was preparing this presentation, I said, wow, I'm wrong here. This is not complete. So the new version is that responsible kind of AI not only examines its outputs, but actively tries to mitigate unwanted legal, political, and ethical impacts of it that it may produce. I don't have this in English, but the presidency of Portugal commissioned us with a guide for responsible AI, and there it's in Portuguese, but we have lots of concepts associated. The link is here, and with good AI, you can translate it into your native language. Well, for the conclusion, this is very, sorry, Serge, I'm a bit little over, but the conclusions are the following. So, current context is challenging because of many things. the changes, the capillarity, the volume, the 5 V's of big data: volume, variety, velocity, veracity. Risks are many and big. I just mentioned these 6 ones. The problems are many. I picked the 2 ones that I think are the most troublesome: entropy and assessment of truth. And the concerns are many. I just presented you very briefly 5 of them. So the take-home points are: generative technologies, to me, are great for assisting humans, not for substituting humans. Machines are not ready for delegations of vital decisions. Current limitations impose that the human should be, current limitations should be included in the loop. And of course, that mitigation mechanisms are crucial for achieving an upper level of autonomous use of AI. And for things such as this, AI is very good to establish what. Shy is good for how, but only right or responsible AI is what we need for the establishment of whys, what for, against whom, which is something not very common when we perform optimization. And I think also that is a good idea to, for example, add dimensions. For example, we have a student currently doing a research on fake news, and we are adding, we are using ensembles. We are adding lots of dimensions to perform analysis, different ones. And when we put all of them together, we have a very reasonable assessment of veracity. I don't have time to go into details, but I think you got the picture here. And of course, there are many suggestions. One of them is to use hybrid systems. Good idea. For example, self-organizing map plus neural networks, reinforcement learning, digital twins, conscious approaches. Why not? Random forests, ensembles, as I mentioned, I showed you, and obviously Peirce's abduction, which is induction plus deduction. So for the closing remarks, even though optimism is not always the winning strategy, digital plagues like the Millennium Bug, unsolicited messages have been framed. This is a fact. Why not fake news and all the problems associated with generative techniques as well? So my current understanding is this: if AI helped on the virus creation, on the problem creation, why not it could help on the production of vaccines and solutions? So we could go on discussion about algorithms mediated reality. We could go on bubble effects and lack of transparency, but I'll stop here. Sorry if I went over the time, and I end with this conclusion of statement of Yuval Harari: AI has hacked the operating system of human civilization. So thank you very much. Obrigado. And for you, Serge, merci.